A little intro about us. So we are from Tsaaro. Tsaaro is a boutique consulting firm. We are into privacy and information security consulting. And along with that, we also have our Tsaaro Academy, wherein we have taught almost 200 plus batches in privacy and infosec. About me, I'm Sishkant and I work as a director here at Tsaaro. So I take care of privacy implementation and privacy engineering. So I'm also an FIP, CIPM, CIPT, and CIPP certified, along with few other certifications that I have done. And we have Pulkit here. Pulkit is a manager at PwC. He worked as a DPO with BT, and he's a renowned data privacy expert. He's very popular, and he has trained so many batches till now. Right, he has CIPP-A, Asia, Europe, and CIPM. He also an FIP holder. Right, Pulkit, what do you like to do about your intro?
You pretty much covered it, Sasikant. But yeah, hey everyone. So as Sasikant mentioned, I am a manager with PwC right now. So had been in privacy space for over 8 years now. So I've seen growing privacy exponentially, especially after GDPR. So I see privacy now as post GDPR era and pre GDPR era, and the post GDPR era had been evolving like any, and it would still evolve in next 5 to 10 years. So it's still a start, still a baby. So yeah, looking forward to share whatever insight I can share with you to kind of customize your CV based on the DPO requirements and what actually recruiters are looking for based on my experience.
So that's about us, guys. So this is about Tsaaro. We are official partners with IAPP. We are official partners with PECB, DSR. So we do a lot of privacy trainings, and also we are into consulting. So we do have a lot of clients in consulting where we provide our privacy services, loan staff engagements, privacy programs, and other things. Right. So just a disclaimer before we start. The entire points held during the session, right? These are for educational purposes and not for any professional judgment, right? So you need to be careful around that. We come up with our own experiences and prejudice, right? And we are providing opinions on individual basis. None of us represents our companies, right? And our opinions are individuals. Right, so Pulkit, without any further delays, we'll start our agenda. Right, we are going to discuss who is the DPO, what does a DPO do, what are the job prospects, the future job prospects we are having, and what is the earning potential for a DPO, the skills and certifications that a DPO should possess, and what are the tips to build the CV, right? The first part I'll explain who is DPO, and then you can take it up to explain what did you do for BT, like what was your role as a DPO and what does a DPO do in general, right? So a DPO is kind of an advisory role who helps in terms of understanding the privacy requirements and advises the organization on how to secure the personal data. They'll be responsible, like he or she will be responsible to monitor the internal compliance. He will be the point of contact for all the supervisory authorities, right? So he'll be the face of the organization in case if there is any data subject request. So the data subject request or any concerns for the data subject, the DPO will be the point of contact. So DPO is one critical role in case if something happens and the supervisory authority needs to contact the organization, it's always the data protection officer. So it's one of the critical roles the organization has to have in order to be compliant with privacy. It's not only a regulatory requirement, but also for your operations, DPO will be a critical in terms of your privacy program management, right? So what does a DPO do? So Pulkit, over to you. Like, what was your role at BT? What did you do? And what can we expect if I'm applying for a DPO role?
Sure. Thanks, Sasikant. So this slide pretty much sums it up in a very nice way. So when I was with BT, I was taking care of Asia, Middle East, and Africa region. So that's around 15 jurisdictions where there is an existence of some privacy regulation in some form.
Right.
So it's all there are two parts, or I would say three parts of a DPO. One is a regulatory aspect, the second is an operational aspect, and the third is an advisory aspect. So when
Right.
we talk about regulatory aspect, it's depending on the jurisdiction, you might need to register with the regulator there. Now, the regulator may have a requirement that, for example, in Singapore, they had a requirement that the DPO may not be in Singapore, but should always be available in Singapore business hours and have a Singapore phone number. So though I
Right.
was not in Singapore, I was registered as a DPO with with the Singapore regulator PDPA,
Okay.
and I had a Singapore phone number which they could have reached out to me. And then the regulatory aspect of it also includes responding to any of the regulator questions around the organization's data privacy practice, what we are doing, what our plans. One of the Many of the regulators, at least when I was BD, they expect kind of a privacy annual report to be submitted to them by the DPO.
Okay.
That privacy annual report basically describes what the organization has done to mature their privacy program over the last 1 year, what DPIs they did, whether any of the DPIs were submitted to the regulator, again, depending on the regulatory requirement.
Right.
What training and awareness measures were taken, what were the KPIs, how did you measure the success of the training and awareness, were there any privacy incidents, how many DSRs were submitted, how many were responded back on time. So kind of an overview of what BT has done over the last 1 year. So I created a privacy report every year and had
Okay.
submitted to some of the regulators based on their. If it's a regulatory requirement, we have to do it anyways. Otherwise, if they request for it, we have to submit it. So that's the regulatory aspect of it. Then the operational aspect of it involves reviewing the DPIAs as a DPO. So not especially in an organization as complex as BT or any of the large organization, you would not be as a DPO reviewing all of the PIAs because
Right.
there would be a privacy team. Generally, in some organization, they follow those three LOD measures, like first LOD is the
Right.
business, LOD is the SMEs, the privacy team, and the third LOD is the internal audit team. So in many organizations, the PIAs are done by first LOD by the business themselves. So HR may have their own privacy experts, marketing may have their own privacy experts. So they would be doing the PIA. In smaller organization, the privacy team does all the PIAs irrespective of the business functions.
Right.
Now, in a large organization like in BD, I only review DPIAs, which means the PIAs which are which involve high risk to the individuals, to the rights of the individuals, involving sensitive personal data, a large data set, cross-border data transfer. So I reviewed those DPIAs. I also reviewed some of the complex DSR cases. So how BT operated is, and how every big organization operates. They have a binding corporate rules which are signed by all the subsidiaries of that organization. So irrespective of whether you are BT India, you are BT Singapore, BT UAE, you would be a signatory of the binding corporate rule of BT Group, and that binding corporate rule will put some rules around how you process personal data in BT, irrespective of what jurisdiction you are in. So, for example, in India, we don't have any rights to individuals so far,
Right.
but still, because BT India entity was a signatory of the BT Group for a BCR, we had to have a DSR process in place, and our customers were given an option to exercise their rights.
Great.
So reviewing all those complex DSR requests, not all of them because there's a separate DSR team.
Right.
So all of these cases comes into the operational side of it. Then the advisory aspect of the DPO is where you kind of engage with a lot of stakeholders in trying to understand what they are trying to do in terms of the new project, new applications, new initiatives, and then suggest the best practices around privacy, ensuring the privacy by design is implemented or it has been taken care of, and then a lot of training and awareness to the business functions, especially those who process a lot of personal data. Sometimes in a B2B space, like
Mm.
BT has a B2B operation in the Asia, Middle East, and Africa region. There's a B2C space. So sometimes I had been involved as a DPO to train some of our clients as well. corporate clients as well, which are like very small. They don't understand privacy. So they
Right.
requested, as they are our customers, that can you come and just tell us what data privacy is in general. So that training and awareness is the third pillar, I would say, for comes in the advisory aspect of the DPO. So that's pretty much what a DPO does and what I had been doing in BD as a DPO.
That's a pretty lot of activities, right? Like right from DSRs, PIA, advisory, regulatory, it's like a lot of activities. Right. So the next part is what are the job prospects, right? Since we have a lot of things that are there as a DPO, right? And even if you look at BT or any complex organization, right, there are several DPO roles. It's not like one DPO that heads everything. We have several DPO roles, right? So how does it structure in general, the team and everything for a DPO?
It depends on the size of the organization and their privacy
Right.
program and the privacy team structure, but it could be generally in a very large organization with like lakhs of employees. There's a DPO
Right.
office. There's no one person. There's a DPO office
Right.
with, of course, a DPO, a main DPO. Like you would see it in Infosys also. There's a global DPO, but he has a DPO office, which
Right.
involves a lot of different kind of advisors to the DPO. Then,
Hmm.
as I mentioned earlier, there could be a scenario where a SME, a small to medium enterprise, might engage someone like Tsaaro to provide that external DPO service or a DPO as a service, where they would say
Right.
that, hey, can you come and be a DPO for us and act as a DPO? Because some of the even in EU, their DPO as a service is very popular, especially around SMEs, because they don't have budget to a DPO or pay out the salary of a DPO. So they generally
Right.
engage the external consultants to be a DPO for them for a certain period of time.
Hmm.
And then the entire privacy team can be structured, as I mentioned, in those three LODs formed with the business as a first LOD, the second LOD is SMEs. Or there could be just like a privacy team which takes care of, like when I was with Intel before BT.
Hmm.
We were one privacy team, but we were assigned different business functions to focus on. Like I was focusing on IT and corporate services. One of my colleague was focusing on HR. So
Right.
anything that happened with IT or corporate services, any new project, new initiatives, I was taking care of it from a privacy standpoint. So it really depends on how a company is structured, but a DPO is a title which is there in GDPR, but in other regulations, it can be called as privacy officer, privacy compliance officer. So, but the roles and responsibilities would remain same, and the regulatory kind of, we can say, protection or the regulatory responsibilities around the DPO would remain same. Just the title may change.
Exactly. It's basically a dedicated person for the privacy program, kind of a thing, right?
Yes.
Right. So coming to the most important question, and everyone will be interested, right? What is the general pay levels for the DPO, right? Based on your experience, like in India, right? Where my question is, India, like most of us, the participants are from India, right? So
Mm.
what they can expect, right? If they develop themselves to become a future DPO, what can they expect in terms of pay levels?
It's a very good question, and it's not stagnant. So the more the privacy comes into the front line in terms of the management issue, the more it gets matured in India, the salary are going to increase, especially once the data protection bill, whenever it happens, gets enacted. The requirement
Right.
of DPO will be a regulatory requirement, and the skill set required and the skill gap, there's a huge skill gap still in the Indian market of a DPO of that skill set. So
Right.
once that becomes a regulatory requirement, the companies would be willing to pay anything for a right skillful person who has the skill to be a DPO. But
Exactly.
at the current scenario, I would say I can only tell you the minimum wage.
Hmm.
I mean, the maximum could be anything, again, depending on
Right.
the
Depend on the
organization, but
organization.
you can expect at least 20 LPA days for in India at right now. Again, I'm saying it will increase in future once the bill
Right.
gets
Right. So
enacted.
It also depends on at what years of experience you are coming as a DPO,
Right.
what is your skill set. But we can expect a good amount of salary. That we can, that's for
Definitely.
sure. Right now, the most important question: what are the skills required to become a DPO? Right? What are the skills as a person that we need to develop?
I would say just two skills. I don't want to complicate it. I mean, you can expand it out. But in my
Right.
opinion, the most important skill is not a technical skill, not a regulation knowledge, not GDPR knowledge, not privacy knowledge. The most important skill is stakeholder management. Because as a
Right.
DPO or people management skills, because as a DPO, you have to talk to a lot of people within your company, outside of your company, and you are a person who is expected to talk in layman language and it is has the ability to explain privacy in a very simple terms to someone who doesn't understand what personal data is. So and you would get into a lot of conversations, and I had been a lot of conversations which were very tough in terms of the business not understanding why they need to do a PIA, why they need to talk to privacy team, why can't they just implement the project right away, because they understand what
Right.
security is, what security measures they have to implement, what controls they have to implement, but they don't understand that privacy is different than security. They just think that,
And
okay, I have implemented security control, that's it, I don't need to talk to the privacy team. So you need to be able to kind of make those people understand the importance of privacy in a very nice manner, because you
right.
can't really because you don't want to portray privacy team or portray yourself as a person who kind of create blockades in any project implementation. You want to be seen as a catalyst to them. You are helping them
Right.
out doing the right thing without creating issues in the project launch or application launch or any product launch. When you talk to the regulator has a different kind of uh, uh, has a different requirement of you. They feel that if you are a DPO, you are, you know, in and out of privacy. You have that technical
Right.
understanding of the regulation, the in and out of it. So when you talk to a regulator, it becomes a different kind of conversation, and the diplomacy, the diplomatic conversations that you need to have with the regulator is different. So you need to have this talking to a business, talking to a regulator, and then talking to a customer. Those are your three different groups of individuals you will be talking to, and talking to all
Right.
of these three groups will be different. You'll be talking different language to the regulator, to the business, to the customer. I always say that stakeholder management is the most important skill for a DPO, and unfortunately, that comes with an experience. You can't really learn that. I mean, there are courses which teach you how to be a people person, improve your people management skills, but like trust me, you would get a lot of conversations where all of that theoretical knowledge will go into toss. So it comes with
Right.
experience. Of course, the other part is your legal knowledge or the operational knowledge, but that you can always learn. That's not something that's very tough. You can just read the theory, read what the law is, understand what the law is. Of course, the operation side of it again comes with the experience. The more PIAs you
Right.
do, the more TSR requests you review, the more knowledgeable you get. But
Right.
I would say that can still be done. But stakeholder management is something that you really need to focus on, and you don't need to kind of have the conversations around privacy every time. When you are in an organization, you want to become a DPO in next, like, let's say 2 to 5 years. Start talking to people around just general thing. What are they doing? What new project they are working on? Just have those general conversations in your team, outside your team, in your company. It doesn't have to be about privacy if it's not required. But if you start doing that right now, that will really help you out when you become a DPO. DPO, and you would need to have those conversations with them.
Right, exactly. So you're building a relationship, right? So that you can get the answers from your team. So Pulkit, I have an interesting question. So I come
Mhm.
from an engineering and management background, right? And I'm
Mhm.
working in privacy. When we look at the DPO requirements, right, it's morely, it looks like a legal, right? So we have this question, right? I will be one of them. Can
Mhm.
an engineer become a DPO? Is that
I'm an
or
engineer.
right? So how is it like? Is it like most of the times when we see, right, they are looking for a person either with an LLB experience or an LLM, more from this legal angle? Like, how does it look?
I would say that a lawyer who's not a risk person can be a good
Hmm.
DPO, or a risk person who doesn't understand legal knowledge is a good DPO. So it has to be a mix of both. A person has to have a risk background, and a person
Hmm.
need to be able to understand the interpret the law. The
Right.
problem is, again, nothing against any of the lawyers. If we have any lawyers in this session, and not anything against them, but a lawyer, if doesn't a lawyer doesn't understand the risk management,
Right.
the operational
Hmm.
risk. So just being a lawyer doesn't make you a good DPO. So because when you are a DPO, you need to be able to understand what privacy risks are there in a new initiative, and then what controls could be implemented to mitigate that risk. And the law degree doesn't really teach you that. I'm an engineer, so I started my career with cybersecurity, cyber risk. So that's where my risk background comes from. So when I moved into privacy, the main focus which I was into is to understand or to read the regulations, different regulations, page to page, end to end, because I wanted to gain that skill to be able to interpret the law, because I knew that I have a risk background, so I don't need to focus on that.
Right.
So whenever you become a DPO, a good DPO will have both legal expertise. Again, doesn't have to be a lawyer, but a legal
Hmm.
expertise in a sense that you are able to interpret the law, you're able to negotiate the contracts, you're able to understand what a contract says. And then at the same time, you need to have that operational risk knowledge of what a risk management is, what a risk is, what a control is, what are those privacy risks, what are the privacy controls. Because the business might be depending on you to give them their expert advice of what privacy controls that they need to implement before going live with their project.
Right.
So an engineer can be a DPO, a lawyer can be a DPO. It's just have to have that mix of both legal and risk knowledge.
Thanks for that, Pulkit. That's encouraging. So many engineers will feel better now. Right. So next important question is like, now I'm an engineer or a lawyer. What is the path that I need to go? What kind of certifications of the organizations are looking for? Why?
Okay. So the first certification I would say you should go for is CIPPE, because privacy started in Europe, and you need to understand the history of privacy, where it all started, how it got matured, where does those GDPR principles comes from, because it's not something new. It had been there for
Right.
decades, 20, 30 years, and the GDPR just
Hmm.
got them included in the text. So you need to understand where those principles come from. Why are those
Right.
principles so important that every regulation other than GDPR also talks about them? So you need to understand that history of privacy, and the best way to do that is to do the CIPP certification. So any certification that you do, just don't do it for the sake of it. Do it for a reason that you want to learn about that course. So whenever you practice, or whenever you study for that certification, study with a mindset that you want to learn about that course, not just for the sake of putting that credential in front of your name. That's why I did CIPP when I moved into privacy as the first certification, because I wanted to understand what privacy is, where it comes from. The next thing you should be doing after CIPPE is CIPM, because that would help you understand the entire privacy program, how it starts, how you monitor it, what are the metrics you need to implement to maintain the maturity of the privacy program. So it will teach you each and everything from a manager standpoint, because as a DPO you need to understand the privacy program, how it works, and if there are challenges in any aspect of privacy program, you can help solve those challenges. And that's why there is a reason IIPP say that for a good DPO you have to have a CIPPE and CIPM, because CIPPE will teach you the history of privacy and CIPM will teach you all about privacy program. Other than that, if you don't have any risk background at all, if you're a law professional, I would say you should go for CISA, CISA from ISACA, or you can at least, if not CISA, because it's kind of a complex certification, you can go for 27001 lead auditor or 27701 lead auditor, which will teach you all about controls and risk.
Right, exactly. So it's not only about having the legal knowledge, but also we need to have some sort of security knowledge, right?
Yes.
Right. So the most important, like, what is it like when you are recruiting for your team? Like, what is it that you look for in the CV, and like, how should an ideal CV look like for a privacy professional?
A good CV is always maximum 2-pager. First of all, if it goes
Right.
beyond two page, I don't read it. Honestly, I don't read those CVs.
Right.
Because it gets too boring for me to keep reading all of those lines. So a good CV first has to be 2-pager, not more than 2-pager. And how you make it 2-pager, especially if you're like 8-9 years experience, stick to the point. Just have those one-liners of your responsibility.
Right.
Just try to a paragraph what you have done. Just it has to be an actionable line that identifying or helped, oversaw, something like it has to start with an action verb. And it should be a one-liner of your. It could be like 8-9 bullet points if you have done a lot in an organization. But all of those bullet points have to be one-liner and an actionable item or actionable line. So that as a recruiter or as a hiring manager, someone can understand what you exactly have done.
Right.
Third thing is it should be always I, should not never be we, because all the recruiters, hiring managers looking for what you have done. They don't really care about what you have done in a team. They want to understand what you have done in that team. So always use I or never use we in your CV or in your interview. So whenever even if you're doing giving interviews for a role of a TP or any other, always stick to I, what you have done. So don't use we. I mean, keep it minimum. Um, Again, based on the role, if it's for a DPO, whatever I mentioned earlier, those 3 pillars, advisory, regulatory, and operational, talk all about all of them in your CV, what you have done in all of those areas. And if you're applying for a specific some role like a privacy consultant or a DSR consultant or a PIA expert, then stick to that domain. Try to especially for lawyers, try to see what you have done around risk, like if you have done any risk assessments as a lawyer. Even so, I have seen many people who are just like have 2-3 years of legal experience in mostly around reviewing the contracts. So they might not have privacy background, but they they can showcase their privacy skill by saying that the contracts also involves privacy clauses that they have reviewed, so they have some knowledge about privacy, and they made a kind of educated or known assessment on what risk could be there if the contract terms are not right. So I mean, the thumb rule is you have to, if you're a lawyer, if you have to involve, you have to use the keyword risk in some manner, because that's what something recruiter will be looking for, hiring manager will be looking for. As a general rule, I mean, that's specific to the privacy CV, but as a general rule in a CV, when you read a job description, identify those keywords which are there in a job description. To include them in your CV when you're writing about your responsibilities in your previous organization. Of course, only say what you have done. Don't exaggerate much, because then if the hiring manager ask you questions about that, because some of the hiring managers, what they do, they just open up your CV. They ask you, okay, you have written this. Explain what you have done in that. So if I'm not done that, you have not done something, don't include that in your CV just for the sake of it. But try to include those keywords which are there in job description into your CV, because what recruiters do, they just search for those keywords which are there in job description. If they find those keywords, they take that CV forward. If you don't find that keywords, they just reject it straightforward, because they have a lot of applications to review. So try to use those keywords which are there in job description. So yeah, that's all. And always highlight your, especially in privacy, always highlight your certifications. If you have done CIPP, CIPM, I would recommend that on top of it, where you put your name, put that badge of CIPP or CIPM on top only, because then it will highlight that you have those certifications. It really helps. And education should always come at the last. If you are an experienced professional more than 3 years, education becomes less important. It's anyways less important now. No one really looks at education. They are more they're more focused on the actual knowledge and work experience. So always put education as the last section of your CV.
Right, that's interesting. One great point, right? You mentioned that along with the name mentioned CIPP and CIPM. People need not search for what certifications you have, and that adds a lot of value and saves time for the recruiter to at least your
Right.
resume gets shortlisted and goes to the hiring manager first.
Mhm.
Right. That's interesting. And most important thing is, I have a question now. See, for
Mhm.
example, most organizations are industry specific, right? So, for example, it may be a retail industry, maybe something in oil and gas, right? Do we need to have that experience, like industry specific, to crack into that role, or DPO is kind of a generic role where anyone from any industry can jump into the other one?
Yeah, it's a generic role. Doesn't really matter. What matters is you need to understand how that industry works.
Right.
Generally, you don't need to have a
Mm,
practical experience, but if the hiring manager asks, like, okay, you are going to work in an natural oil and gas sector, do you know what that sector is? You can just read
right.
about it before your interview, and you should be good. A DPO is a more of a general role. It doesn't really matter which sector you're coming from. You just need to
Exactly.
have
So
a basic
it's
knowledge about that sector.
right. So I think we are almost at the end of the session. So if we have any questions coming from the live, we'll just let me open that and I'll put it forward to you.
Sure. Sunny Gupta is asking, any registration required separately as a DPO in India or other countries? In India, no. So far, as I mentioned earlier, in Singapore, you have to register with the regulator as a DPO. Your organization, your legal team will help with that. So it really depends on the jurisdiction. Like in UAE, you don't need to register as a DPO. In China, you need to register as a DPO. They call it personal information officer, PIO. So that's different in DPO, but PIO is same. So it depends on jurisdiction. So one important thing as a DPO, again, not relevant to this particular section, but as a
Hmm.
DPO, you need to track all the legislations that you are responsible for, so that if there's any legislation changes in any of the jurisdictions, you are aware of it. So there are many tools that can help you with that, like data guidance. But as a DPO, you need to be aware of that. So yeah, depends on the jurisdictions. Like in India, there's no requirement for registration as a DPO right now, because there is no requirement of
Yeah,
having a.
it's
Christina asks, are there companies that hire junior DPOs or privacy analysts? There's nothing like junior DPO, Christina, honestly. Of course, there are multiple roles like privacy analyst, privacy consultant, privacy manager. But DPO is a DPO. I have seen some of the organizations hiring for like deputy DPO or assistant DPO, but it's just a title. It's not a regulatory role, which a company may just to assist the DPO in doing the responsibilities, doing the role that he's responsible for because of the regulation. But yeah, privacy analyst is a very common role that companies hire for, and they would expect you to kind of have an end-to-end knowledge of everything in a privacy program, how to do a DSR, how to do a PIA, how to how to review a privacy incident, how to manage a record of processing activities, or how to manage a data inventory, how to ensure cookie compliance. So there could be, depending on the job description, you can just read through it and
like
see what
Pulkit,
are
just to add on to
responsibilities that
that.
are. Yeah. Yeah.
So, like, do we have a supporting team for the DPO, or is it like a more an individual role?
There is a support. I mean, depending on the size of the organization, as I mentioned earlier, there in big organizations like Infosys, they have a DPO office which has
Right.
like a DPO and then 10 people supporting him, doing different things. But
Right.
if there's a DPO office, that DPO office is generally also the privacy team of that organization. They are just calling it as a DPO office. But
Okay.
I have not seen any organization where there's a DPO office also and there's a separate privacy team also. It's generally
Interesting.
one the same thing.
Right.
How should be a CV of fresher student who wants to intern? Okay. So for an internship or a CV of a fresher, I would recommend that if you want to come into the privacy field, you should do a lot of research about the regulation. Let's say a lot of research about GDPR and what a privacy program is, what a cookie compliance is, what a PIA is, those general terms, and highlight that you have the knowledge about it in your CV. Try to do some of the free LinkedIn learning courses. There are many of them around GDPR, around privacy program. So you can do some of them and highlight that you have done that learning course through LinkedIn. Shows you that you have the willingness to learn more about privacy. You know about privacy theoretically, because as an intern you are not expected to have any practical knowledge. It's just all about theory that you should be aware of. So highlight those things that you have the knowledge about PIA through this course. So, and then try to highlight what you are good at in terms of your skills. The biggest mistake anyone can do as a fresher or an experienced professional in a CV is highlight their extracurricular activities. Those days are gone when you were used to highlight your extracurricular activities. You're good in tennis or you're good in traveling or something. No one is interested to know that, honestly. So don't include your extracurricular activities. Keep it professional. You may want to, as a fresher, you may want to. Again, I would recommend that education should come in the last section, even for a fresher, because the hiring team cares about your domain knowledge. They don't really care about the education because they expect that you would have some education, and if they want to have a look at it, they can look at the last section. The important thing is to highlight your domain knowledge or for an intern CV, your theoretical knowledge. Okay. Christina again asked, what is the most important thing it has to be in someone's CV if it has no work experience and practical knowledge about DPO, but if it has a lot of theoretical knowledge. Same thing. If you have any experience as a lawyer or as a risk professional, but you don't have any experience around DPO, that's okay. Just highlight those again. Same thing. Take the keywords from the job description and use those keywords and put your experience around that keyword or what you have done in it. So doesn't have to be that for a DPO CV. If you're not a DP, if you're not never had been a DPO before, it's okay. Everyone starts from somewhere. Like I was not a DPO before I became a DPO for PT, but it's important that you highlight your experience of what you have done as a privacy professional earlier. And some of the companies ask for cover letter also. I've seen very few companies doing it now, but if they ask for a cover letter, just highlight how would you be a good fit for the role in that cover letter. But 90% of the companies don't ask for a cover letter now. Nishant asks, do we have a good workshop available for DPO or reference material? I would recommend that you should check out Tsaaro's CTDPO course, because I am also a trainer there, and it is a very good course. Not saying because I am a trainer, but because it's a good course. I know the modules that we teach as a CTO DPO certification. It covers end to end of what a DPO does, what it have. So yeah, you can go for that, Nishant. Otherwise, as I mentioned earlier, there are IIPP courses as well that you can go for. For a reference material, just do a simple Google search. You will see a lot of reference material by IIPP if you want to read about it. Sunny asked if any person have good experience of management of US projects and doing CIPP and not doing CIPM. Is it fine or still need to do CIPM? Again, I don't know, Sunny, what you mean by management of US projects. But if it's not related to management of a privacy program, I would recommend that you still go for CIPM because CIPM specifically talks about the privacy program management and how to just right from the start of how you get the management buy-in, how you build a team, what skills you look for a team in your privacy operations space. How do you do a data mapping? How do you start a privacy program till the end of how you create those metrics? So if those management of US projects doesn't really involve anything related to privacy, I will still recommend you go for CIPM. One more question by Sunny is how much time lead auditor and CIPP will take to complete the certificate as a general? Depending on your experience, Sunny, but CIPP is generally, I would say, it should take, if you study for it 1 hour or 2 hour daily, it should take you like a month's time or a month and a half time for you to go for the certification for CIPP. And for lead auditor, I would say again, a month time is a good time for you to go for a certification. Fani Kumar asks, without privacy background, any certifications related to DPO will help you start a career in DPO. So a good thing about CIPPE is you don't need to have a privacy background because there are 3 sections in CIPPE. The first section talks about the history of privacy. The second section talks about mostly GDPR. And the third section talks about the technologies that involves the processing of personal data when privacy is involved. So you don't need to honestly have any privacy background to do a certification like CIPPE. So you can go for that. And once you have done the CIPP, you will have some theoretical knowledge of privacy. Then you can target to go for CIPM if you want. Otherwise, go for a privacy role with your CIPP degree experience of 2 years, and then go for CIPM and then target for DPO. I think that would be the good career path. Christina asked, can we intern at Tsaaro, for example? Succinct, that's for you.
Right, Christina. So you can reach out to us if your skill set matches our requirements. We are always open. We have a couple of openings posted. You can always apply for that, and we'll review your profile.
Okay, cool. So yeah, Nagendra asks, what are the most common questions we may get in an interview for consultant role? Depends on the job description really, but for a consultant role, they would ask you firstly if you have any practical experience in privacy. If yes, what you have done. If no, they would ask you some general questions around GDPR most to start with. What the GDPR is, what are those principles in GDPR, what are the rights to the individuals, what is record of processing activities, why is it required, what is a PIA, what's the difference between a PIA and a DPIA. They will give you some kind of case studies, some scenarios where you would have to answer some of the questions, whether a PIA is required, or if there's a DS, they might give you a case study around DSR, saying that you're not able to find the data that the data subject has requested for. What would you do next, and how would you manage to come in consensus with the business of them giving you the data that the data subject has requested for. So that kind of questions they'll ask you, but what they will try to test you when you are giving those responses is your communication skills, because again, whether a DPO or a privacy role, you would be communicating a lot with the business stakeholders. So they will always test your communication skills, or whether you are able to when they ask you about GDPR, they would not they would expect that you explain GDPR in very simple terms so that they can test your knowledge, whether you will be able to explain GDPR in layman's language to other business stakeholders as well. Yeah, just keep that in mind. Keep your communication clear, to the point, and don't deviate much in your interview from what has been asked. Cool. Any more question? I have covered everything, I think.
I think we have covered everything almost.
Okay.
That's great, Pulkit. You have answered all the questions for them. Hope it helps them. Right. So I think we are at the end of the session, and thank you everyone for joining, and hope you have some knowledge around how to build your CV. Thank you so much, Pulkit. That was really informative, and that's really helpful for people coming into privacy.
Sure.
And you can reach out to us. We have LinkedIn profiles in the networking. You can just add on. And if you have any questions, you can either reach out to Pulkit or me, and we are always available to answer.
Thanks for having me, Satikant. Thank you.
Thanks for giving. Thank you, everyone. Have a nice day. Bye bye.